On a country road in rural America, you might pass a horse-drawn buggy full of people who look as if they live in another era. And in a way, they do. The Amish live as if time has stopped, on farms with no cars, no phones, and often no electricity. It may not be the first setting you think of for a mystery novel, but author Linda Castillo did. And she's just published her 12th crime novel set in an Amish community in the fictional town of Painters Mill, Ohio. Castillo's main character is the chief of police, Kate Burkholder, who grew up Amish. Kate Burkholder has a foot in both worlds.
You do have to speak to the chief of police, and that happens to be me.
She lives in modern society but can't completely escape her Amish roots. Castillo's new novel, Outsider, magnifies this juxtaposition with a page-turning plot of police corruption and long-buried secrets. Linda Castillo, it's so good to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
The first thing I'd like to ask you about is why the Amish? What made you so interested in the Amish that it prompted you to write really a whole series of books about the Amish?
One of the most intriguing things for me as a writer is that people just don't know very much about the Amish. I think there's an element of mystery about the Amish people, about their culture, even about the Anabaptist religion. But I actually started my career in romance. And in about, probably 2007 or so, I wanted to write a breakout novel. And I had a high concept idea, and it was a terrific plot. I had some terrific characters. And by that point in my career, I knew that if I didn't put this book over the top, that it wasn't going to fly. And I took sort of an impromptu visit to Amish country in Ohio. I'm originally from Ohio. I was with my sister and my brother-in-law. I'm thinking about, the book, the way writers do. And so my brother-in-law grew up in a 200-year-old farmhouse in the middle of Amish country. And we're visiting family. We're standing in the front yard saying our goodbyes. It's like 20 below zero. There's 10 inches of snow on the ground. And an Amish buggy comes by on the road. I hear the clip-clop of shod hooves. And I turned and I looked. Being a writer, I thought about that idea, this high concept idea for a thriller that I had been toying with for months. And at that moment, I knew that I was going to set that book among the Amish.
What about that sort of push-pull that I felt between this very, not sheltered, but private community and this sort of major intrusion from the outside world? Was that something intentional when you wrote the book?
So one of the things that I try to do when I depict the Amish in my books is I try to make them as realistic as possible. One of the tenets of the Amish in particular is that they are separate from the rest of from the world. They consider themselves separate from the rest of the world. And I think that was one of the things, especially being a crime writer, I think it really adds such an interesting element, especially since my protagonist, Kate Burkholder, is a chief of police and she knows the Amish. She sort of knows all of the underpinnings of how the culture works. One of the things in particular, you talked a little bit about the push and the pull, is if you think about these books in terms of crime fiction, you see Ohio Amish country. It's a very beautiful, peaceful, bucolic place. And one of the things that very much intrigued me as a writer is that, I wanted to have the introduction of something evil into this, this benign and rather innocent society. It gives sort of an idea about what this book is about. Chief of Police Kate Burkholder is formerly Amish in a small Ohio town in the heart of Amish country. And she receives a call from an Amish person saying that they've discovered a wrecked automobile, actually a truck, on a back road. And Kate goes to investigate, and she discovers that she knows this person. The person had asked for her specifically. And the person who is in the truck is injured, and she is a police officer. And more importantly, in this, for this book, is she was Kate's best friend. She was the girl that Kate, the first English girl that Kate met after she left the Amish. When Kate left when she was about 18 years old, and they went through the police academy together. They became young police officers together, and they had a falling out. I don't want to give away too much about the book, but Gina Colarosa is this character's name, and she was absolutely a fascinating character. Not only did I get to explore Gina, but this is one of those books, even though it's the 12th book in this series, that I really learned a lot of things about Kate Burkholder.
Do you think that's because you had this foil in Gina? She could reflect back Kate?
Yeah, absolutely. I knew Gina Colarosa is actually mentioned in the very first book in the series, Sworn to Silence, but of course she's only mentioned in passing. She doesn't make an appearance or anything like that. I've always known she was there. And I'm a firm believer in that when you're a writer, sort of in your subconscious is always working on different things, even when you're not aware of it. And I think I've been working on Gina all of these years. And I sort of always wanted to tell that story. How did Kate learn not to be Amish? How did she learn to become English? And we knew there were, some bad behaviors in there and some bad habits and things that young people tend to get into when they're that age. But this relationship tells the story, and I actually do flash back a few times, and it really gives the reader a glimpse of some of the things that built Kate Burkholder into the person she is today.
And that relationship added a whole nother layer of tension to your narrative with, Gina being in the situation she's in and Kate wondering about that and being maybe a little suspicious of her. It seemed to just add to the mystery.
I think one of the reoccurring themes in this book is trust. I think there is, if you think about the friends that we had as young women, that the female bond is a strong thing. And I think, trust, when you're young, it comes so easily. And then as you get older, sometimes we become just a little bit more cynical than we want to become. And I think that, the friendship between Kate and Gina, it was an honest and it was a genuine relationship. And I think toward right before Kate left the Columbus Division of Police, something happened that sort of prompted her to leave, that prompted her to return to Painter's Mill. And Gina was a big part of that.
So the town of Painter's Mill is fictional, is that correct?
It is, yes.
How did you create the details of that town?
I grew up in small town Ohio, and I just love small towns. I love the close-knit feeling and some of the secrets that sort of simmer just beneath the surface that you sort of, they're there, and maybe you don't know all the ins and outs about these secrets. But I wanted Painter's Mill. Of course, it's a very bucolic town. About 1/3 of the population of Painter's Mill is Amish. And last time I mentioned population, I think there are about 5,300 souls in the town of Painter's Mill. But it's a very typical Midwestern small town.
And how did you get the details about the Amish community so spot on? There's so many details about their way of life that are just so vivid. And
when I'm doing research, I tend to become a little bit obsessed. And John Hochstetler, wrote a wonderful, wonderful book about the Amish culture. And every summer I'm lucky enough to be able to go on book tour. And of course, I travel to Ohio, and I have befriended. I have a great friend, Denise, who is a librarian, and I met her at an event. And she's sort of a social butterfly, and she knows a lot of the Amish. And so I was lucky enough to be able to visit an Amish farm and have dinner with the family. We've gone to the Amish and Mennonite Heritage Center and talked to the curator who oversees the place. And I think probably more than anything, it is being there and being able to talk to the Amish that has taught me more than anything. But I think for the most part, I'm able to depict them in a very honest and genuine way.
What do you think readers like so much about this setting?
I think I get a lot of mail from readers, and they love to learn about the Amish. I have some great letters. I save all of them. People wondering. One lady sent me a letter, and she's like, "If you were not Amish, then your mom or your grandmother was Amish." And I'm like, no, not really. But I think when you have a true interest in something, I think it makes it all the more fascinating. And, I do have a very large fan base in sort of the Midwest, upstate New York. There are a lot of Amish who have moved into upstate New York. Of course, Pennsylvania, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Holmes County, Ohio. The Amish are even spreading out into Michigan and Iowa and Indiana and those places. And it seems to me that many people are interested in the Amish, but people who live around the Amish are even more intrigued, and they want to know everything there is to know about them.
You really seem to know your way around the police business as well. How did you find out all that?
That was so much fun. I have to tell you, when I conceived the idea for the first book in this series, I knew absolutely nothing about law enforcement. And the first thing I did, writer buddy and I went and joined the Citizens Police Academy. I was living in Dallas at the time, and it was a very serious. It was like a 12-week course. We went one evening a week. And basically, they had officers and detectives and sergeants come in and talk about what they did. We heard from homicide, crimes against persons. Some of them were pretty tough. Things like child abuse, narcotics. And in terms of writing, being there when they took a call, whether it was a domestic dispute, whether it was a possible burglary or a disturbance in a park, it was really, really helpful because I was able to talk to them, and I was I could ask them questions, and I sort of knew what they were thinking, whether they were worried, whether they were putting on a brave front. So it was a very interesting time.
Were any of the police inspired by some of the real officers that you met?
I would have to say yes. They are inspired by certain people. A lot of these characters, I take traits from different people. Things that I love, some of the things that I don't love, and I take those and I hopefully I am able to build an interesting character. And one of the things I did notice about the police officers that I got to know, they all have pretty good sense of humor. When it comes down to something scary happening or getting down to business, they're all business. So it was really, really helpful to have that limited experience when I started writing this series.
Someone called this a modern reimagining of Witness. What about that?
It happens sometimes.
I loved the movie Witness, and I thought it was just such a fresh movie, and who doesn't love Harrison Ford and Kelly McGillis? And this is maybe a little bit of a play on that. They're similar in some ways, but I think there are also just as many differences. The things that are happening, the the characters who are involved in this story, very, very different. Kate Burkholder, who is the main protagonist, is formerly Amish, and of course she's the lead. She's the chief of police, and so she's leading this investigation. And if you've read the series, you also know that her love interest is a BCI agent, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation out of Columbus, Ohio. That's sort of their state, the state version of their FBI. And so a lot of the players are very, very different, and the story is different, but there are some really fun similarities. Basically, a non-Amish person, an outsider, who is taking refuge on an Amish farm. And, as in Witness, you have that, juxtaposition between Gina's a little rough around the edges. She's got a little bit of a mouth on her, and, you have Amish children present. You have a widower, Amish man who has lost his wife. And you sort of throw these people together, and it really illuminates the differences between the two lifestyles and the kinds of people that they are. But I think not only does it illuminate their differences, but it also, toward the end of the story, there are also some things that are very much the same.
Who were you thinking of when you titled the book Outsider? Because Kate herself could be considered an outsider.
That could actually be a theme of this book. Kate has been, called an outsider. She has felt very much like an outsider, not only among the Amish, that she used to belong to the Amish community, but, because of her past Amishness, she also is a little bit of an outsider in terms of, her English counterparts. And I think the one place that Kate Burkholder fits in is her small police department. And, if you look at Gina Colarosa, who is the outsider who arrived on scene and threw everything into turmoil, she is every bit an outsider in every way possible. But I think, as I mentioned before, sometimes even though she's an outsider, they were able to find common ground. And I thought that was, I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool. That is cool. Well, broadening this out a little bit, I counted the number of books. You're so prolific. You have 12 Kate Burkholder mysteries in the series, right?
Yeah.
And then 20 more novels to your name. So what is your writing schedule like?
Well, I'm a morning person, and I've always been a morning person. It seems like by the end of the day, my brain just gets kind of clogged up with the kinds of things that everybody else's brain gets clogged up with by the end of the day. When I begin writing a book, I usually start with a premise. Many times that premise will be a crime. Sometimes that crime is something that I've read about in the newspaper. Sometimes I'll take one crime or two crimes and sort of put them together. And from there, once I come up with my premise, I am able to, usually I'll write maybe a 5 or 6 page synopsis. And that's basically just where I tell what happens in the story. And, at that point, I may write a first chapter or prologue or something like that. I have a wonderful, wonderful editor, Charlie, and a wonderful, wonderful agent. I get literary feedback from them as well. They always have wonderful ideas, and we sort of play off of that a little bit. But that's, at that point, once I write the synopsis and, and I hear those 3 words that when Charlie says, I love it, I pretty much go to town on the book. I start writing it. Usually I'm a pretty linear writer. I start at the beginning and I work my way through the book. Sometimes I will write chapters out of order. Sometimes I do that inadvertently, and then I'll shuffle them around a little bit just to get the logical order of events into the proper order. But, I'm always writing, I'm on about a yearly schedule. And so it'll usually take me anywhere from 10 or 11 months to complete a book. Some days are good days, some days are not, not that great. Sometimes, I love what I write. Sometimes I think it is the worst thing that anybody has ever written on the face of the earth. But, somehow in the end, I think the key, you just have to keep at it. You have to have faith in the story, and you just have to keep going.
Did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
I actually did. I wrote my first novel when I was 13 years old, and it was about two girls who were 13 years old who ran away from home on their Appaloosa horses. And I've always loved to create characters. I've always loved putting those characters perhaps in slightly dangerous situations or send them off on some adventure. And I've loved creating, not necessarily worlds, but places. For example, Painters Mill, Ohio. It was, to create the townspeople. You have the old historic covered bridge, things like that. That's one of the things that I love to do as a writer. I think one of the challenges that any writer who is writing a series, really regardless of genre, I think one of the challenges that we face is that we need to keep the stories fresh. I think sometimes that entails keeping the characters growing in some way, or perhaps even revealing new information about the characters. And sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge. And one of the things that happens, and it doesn't happen often, a spontaneous thing. When I learn something new about a character, when a character tells me something I didn't know about them, that is always a beautiful moment.
One of your books, I think it is your first Kate Burkholder novel, Sworn to Silence, was made into a Lifetime movie. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So what was that like?
I would have loved to have been more involved than what I was. It was very, very exciting. Neve Campbell was Kate Burkholder, by the way. And she was a fantastic Kate Burkholder. She did a wonderful job with the character. Another thing that they really did a nice job with was the depiction of Painters Mill. This movie was actually filmed in and around Toronto, Canada. And they did a very, very, very good job of capturing that small town feeling. And some of the camera work was very, very good. And of course, Sworn to Silence was, it was a thriller. Sometimes it was scary and sometimes it was intense. The Lifetime people, the producer and everybody, they sort of softened it up a little bit for the Lifetime specific audience. But overall, it was fun and it was exciting, and I really, really enjoyed whatever small part I played in that.
What's next for you?
I'm actually working on the next book in the series, and I'm actually about probably 2/3 of the way finished with the book. I'm working on it right now, and it is actually, I don't even think the title has been made public yet, but I can tell you the title is Fallen, and it is very much, it's, one of the things that I love to do with every book is I want the readers to, know that Kate Burkholder is going to be there, that her, the officers of her small police department are going to be there. John Tomasetti is her love interest. And all of that is there. And yet I do introduce sort of a fresh element. It's an interesting storyline. In a nutshell, what happens is a young woman who was Amish in the town of Painters Mill left the Amish a few years before. She returns to Painters Mill, and the next day her body is discovered in a motel. She's been brutally murdered. And Kate Burkholder knew this girl when she was a young girl. Kate's a little bit older. When Kate's thinking about her, Kate thinks to herself, this girl was the only girl who was ever worse at being Amish than what I was. And so there are a few parallels there. So there's some emotional things going on for Kate as she goes through this investigation.
Well, you certainly have a fully realized character in Kate, and I can tell you like that character. You probably love spending time with her when you're writing, it seems.
I do. I do enjoy Kate Burkholder. Early on, one of the things that I knew that I would do with Kate is she would be, sort of an imperfect character. She makes, especially early on, the readers, if they began with the first book and they read through the series, they have seen Kate grow. She's grown as a person, she's grown as a woman, and she has grown as a police officer. And I think that ever-changing, that growth is one of the things that makes Kate Burkholder such a sympathetic character.
Do you age her in time as well, since there's been so many years since the first book, or quite a few, 12 years or so, I guess, probably.
Yeah, that is actually one of the things that I struggle with because, of course, Kate has a love interest, John Tomasetti, and they both have pasts. And, as much as we sometimes don't like to talk about it, Kate has a biological time clock, and that clock is ticking. And so, Kate has some decisions to make. Tomasetti has some decisions to make. And as a writer, I have some decisions to make. So I have sort of, have a timeline. The books don't happen once a year. Perhaps I'll set one book in the dead of winter, and then the next book will happen maybe early summer or something like that. So I do slow down real time just a little bit.
Is there any way you could read us just a very short excerpt today, since we won't get to see you in person?
I would love to. I've actually got the book here. I actually just received these from my publisher just 2 days ago. The title of the novel is Outsider, and I can actually read the first scene. I love the first scene. It's actually a prologue. She'd always known they would come for her. She knew when they did that it would be violent and fast and happen in the dead of night. Despite all the training, the mental and physical preparation, she'd also known that when the time came, she wouldn't be ready. She wasn't sure what woke her, some barely discernible noise outside the front door, the scuff of a boot against a concrete step, the clunk of a car door as it was quietly closed, the crunch of snow beneath a leather sole, or maybe it was that change in the air, like the energy of a static charge, an instant before a lightning strike.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
I have so much missed being able to go on tour this year. I see, pretty much the same librarians. I was actually at St. Louis Library last summer, which I loved. And of course, I always travel to Ohio, Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Books and Company in Dayton, Ohio. And it is sort of one of the highlights. And so I'm sort of lamenting that I didn't get to go. But of course, it's just one of those things. It's out of everybody's control at this point. But it's always a time that I very much enjoy.
Well, we're all looking forward to when we can see you in person again. Linda Castillo, author of Outsider and the Kate Burkholder Mystery Series, thank you for being with us. It's just lovely to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. It was my pleasure.
Linda Castillo's books are available for purchase at Left Bank Books, either online or with curbside pickup.